She traveled 3,000 miles to marry a dead man. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was why the whole town seemed to want her dead too. The train wheezed into the station at Cedar Ridge like a tired old dragon, its black smoke staining the perfect Colorado sky. Margaret Sullivan stood on the top step of the passenger car, clutching a little scrap of a dog to her chest. Her other hand held a carpet bag that had seen far better days. She was not what the town had expected, and the town was not what she had been promised. From the shade of the platform, the whispers started, like snakes in the dry grass. "Lord have mercy," said a woman with a face like a clenched fist. "Is that the mail-order bride Thomas Morrison sent for?" "Can't be," another one muttered. "Thomas said she was comely." But it was her, Margaret Sullivan, all the way from Philadelphia, and she looked nothing like the photograph she'd sent months ago. Her dress was the color of dishwater. Dust had settled into every seam. Her hair, once neatly pinned, was now a tired halo around a face flushed from the journey. The little dog in her arms, a scruffy terrier named Chester, let out a nervous whine. Margaret took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders against the weight of 100 staring eyes. She was a scandal before her boots even hit the dirt. Her eyes swept the platform, searching for a ghost. A tall man in a brown hat with a red band. "That'll be me," his last letter had promised. But there was no tall man, no brown hat, no Thomas. She felt a cold dread begin to creep up her spine. The station master, a man with a face like a worn-out map, wouldn't meet her eyes. He just kept whirring the brim of his cap. "Ma'am," he stammered, that is to say, it was the town preacher who stepped forward. His voice was the gentle kind he used for funerals. "Miss Sullivan," he said, "I'm afraid I bear difficult news. Thomas Morrison, there was an accident." The words came from a long way off. An accident. 5 days passed, the preacher continued, his voice soft but clear as a bell in the sudden silence. "A horse threw him out near Devil's Canyon." Devil's Canyon. The name itself was a warning. "He didn't survive, ma'am. We buried him Tuesday last." The world tilted. Someone shoved a crate behind her, and she sank onto it. The world a dizzying blur. Dead. The man who had written such beautiful letters, the man who had promised her a new life with yellow curtains and a rose garden, was dead. He was a pile of dust in the Cedar Ridge Cemetery. He was a dream that had died before she even arrived. The woman with the fist-like face, Mrs. Foster, didn't even bother to lower her voice. "Well, what's to be done with her now? Send her back, I suppose." "Doesn't look like she has 2 pennies to rub together," her friend added. Margaret heard every word. "False pretenses," another voice muttered. That was the one that did it. Her head snapped up, her gray eyes flashing with a fire they hadn't seen. "False pretenses?" Mrs. Foster sniffed. "You clearly misrepresented yourself. Poor Thomas was expecting a bride. Not what?" Margaret stood up. Chester clutched to her chest like a shield. "Not a woman who sold everything she owned because she believed in a promise? Thomas Morrison knew exactly who I was. If you must speak ill of someone, I'll thank you not to do it of a man who can no longer defend himself." The platform was silent. She had shamed them, and they didn't like it. Then another voice cut through the tension. "I'll take her in." Heads turned. A man stepped out from the edge of the crowd. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting, and a face that looked like it was carved from stone. His eyes, the color of winter sage, took her in without a flicker of emotion. "Samuel Morrison," the preacher said, his voice full of relief. Thomas's brother. The one who ran the ranch alone. The one who, according to the letters, didn't hold much with town ways. He looked at Margaret, and she saw nothing in his eyes. No pity, no kindness, nothing. "You're the woman my brother sent for," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am. Margaret Sullivan." He gave a single sharp nod. He hefted her trunk onto his shoulder as if it weighed nothing, carried it to a wagon, and then looked back at her. "You coming?" The question hung in the air. Where? To a ranch run by a man with ice in his veins? To a house full of another man's ghosts? But what choice did she have? The platform was a cage of staring eyes. Philadelphia was a world away. This cold, silent man was the only thing standing between her and nothing. As he lifted her onto the wagon seat, his touch was brief and impersonal, like he was loading a sack of flour. The crowd watched as he climbed up beside her, their whispers following them down Main Street. Poor Sam, saddled with her now. That dog looks like a drowned rat. The despised bride, someone laughed. That's what we'll call her. They rode out of town in a silence as vast and empty as the prairie stretching before them. The sun bled out behind the mountains, staining the sky the color of a fresh bruise. Margaret had come west for a new life. She had found a gravestone. But as she looked at the hard profile of the man beside her, she realized a terrifying truth. He wasn't just grieving for his brother. She'd seen grief before. This was something else. This was a man who was haunted, a man who was afraid. And whatever he was afraid of, it had just climbed into his wagon. The Morrison Ranch sat in a valley that looked like God had scooped it out of the mountains with a gentle hand. But the house itself felt wrong. It was a place where something had died, and not just a man. The whole house was holding its breath. Samuel Morrison spoke exactly 10 words on the 2-hour ride. He pointed out the guest room, the privy, and the well. Then he pointed to a pot of stew on the stove. "Help yourself," he said. "I've got stock to tend." He turned to leave, but she had to ask, "Mr. Morrison, what am I to do tomorrow?" He paused in the doorway, his back to her. "That's for you to figure out. Come morning, we'll see about getting you back to town. I have no money for passage home." "Then I guess you'll need to figure something else out," he said, his voice flat. "Maybe the Reverend can take up a collection." The thought of those women, their faces pinched with scorn, passing a hat for the despised bride. It made her stomach turn. "I can work," she said quickly. "I can cook, clean, mend. I don't need a housekeeper," he cut her off. "And I sure don't need—" He stopped himself, but she could fill in the rest. He didn't need a woman here, especially not her. She was left alone in a house that smelled of dust and ghosts. In the small back room, she found a quilt that smelled of lavender. His mother's room, his mother's quilt. A woman 3 years dead, just like the son who'd wanted to bring Margaret here. Upstairs, she heard footsteps, pacing, back and forth, like a caged wolf. Samuel Morrison couldn't find peace in his own home. The next morning, as the sun painted the mountains golden rose, he was waiting by the wagon, her trunk already loaded. He stood staring at the ranch, at the endless prairie, his hand clenched on the wagon wheel. "Thomas loved this place," he said suddenly, his voice rough. "Drove me half mad with his dreaming." "He wrote about those dreams," she said softly. "They were beautiful." "Dream," Samuel spat the word. "Dreams are what get men killed. Make them careless." "Is that what happened? He was careless?" His hand tightened on the wheel until his knuckles were white. "He was riding fence in Devil's Canyon. Horse spooked at a rattler. But his mind was elsewhere. Probably composing another letter to you in his head." The accusation was a slap. "You blame me." "I blame a lot of things," he said, his voice tight. Margaret stepped back from the wagon. "No," she said. "I won't go back to town just to be made a scandal. I came here to work. If not with Thomas, then I'll find another way." He stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. "There is no other way. This is cattle country. It's no place for someone like me," she finished, her voice sharp. "Yes, I gathered that. But I'll be darned if I'll run away just because I'm not what anyone expected." He just looked at her. Really looked at her. Not at her plain face, but at the fire in her eyes. "The house needs cleaning," he said finally. "And I'm tired of my own cooking." Margaret blinked. "What?" "3 days," he said. "You can stay 3 days. After that, you find other arrangements. And you stay out of my way." He turned and walked back to the barn, leaving her standing in the morning light. 3 days. It wasn't a reprieve, it was a test. And as she looked at that cold, silent house, she had the distinct feeling that she wasn't just being tested on her housekeeping skills. She was being tested on her ability to survive, because something was very, very wrong at the Morrison Ranch. And it had nothing to do with dust and old ghosts. Margaret Sullivan didn't just clean the Morrison house. She resurrected it. She waged a 3-day war against dust and neglect, and by the end of it, the house felt like it could breathe again. She scrubbed, she polished, she baked. She found a wild herb garden behind the house and seasoned the stew with rosemary and thyme. When Samuel came in for supper the first night, he stopped in the doorway. He took in the clean table, the wildflowers in a jar, the smell of fresh bread. When he took a bite of the stew, he closed his eyes for just a second. "My mother used to make dumpling," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. On the second day, she found the family photographs in a dusty trunk. A stern-faced man and a gentle-looking woman with 2 young boys. "That's you and Thomas?" she asked when Samuel came in. He nodded. "I packed these away after she died. Couldn't bear to look at them." "She was beautiful," Margaret said, looking at the kind face of the woman who had made this house a home. "Do what you think is best with them," he said, and left before she could see the grief on his face. She put the photographs on the mantel. The house started to feel like a home again. On the third day, a rider approached, a beautiful blonde woman on a fine horse. Catherine Winters. She'd been one of the whisperers at the station. "You must be the bride," Catherine said, her voice like tinkling glass. "I can't imagine why Samuel allowed you to stay." "He was kind," Margaret said, her arms full of laundry. "Kind," Catherine laughed. "That's not a word often applied to Samuel Morrison." She moved closer to Sam when he emerged from the barn, her voice turning soft and concerned. "Samuel, you can't mourn forever. You need to get out, see people." "I'm managing fine, Catherine," he said, his voice flat. Her eyes darted to Margaret. "You might want to be careful, Samuel. People are talking. A single man and woman under the same roof. It's not proper." "Nothing improper about hiring help," Sam said. "Help?" Catherine's laugh was brittle. "Is that what we're calling it?" She rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and tension behind her. That night, their last night, Margaret made a peach cobbler. Sam ate 2 helpings. "My mother's recipe," he said, "from her book." He pushed back from the table. "The house, it looks like it used to, like when she was alive." He cleared his throat. "Thank you." He was gone before she could respond. Later he came back. He was holding a small leather journal. "This was Thomas's," he said. "His plans for the ranch. Thought you should have it." Margaret opened it. Thomas's neat handwriting filled the pages. Sketches of barns, lists of crops, dreams made of ink. "He was a good man," she whispered. "The best," Sam's voice was rough. "Better than this place deserved. Better than—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "Better than you?" she asked softly, reading his silence. "Is that what you were going to say?" He turned to leave, but she caught his sleeve. He froze at her touch. "You're a good man too, Samuel Morrison. Different from Thomas, but good." He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. The stone mask slipped. She saw grief, loneliness, and something else. Something warm and surprised. "Margaret," he said, and her name in his rough voice was a revelation. A bark from Chester broke the spell. Sam stepped back. 5 o'clock. Be ready." The next morning in town, every door was closed to her. The boarding house position was mysteriously filled. The hotel wasn't hiring. The laundry had all the help it needed. Mrs. Foster and the church ladies cornered them outside the Reverend's office. "We have standards in Cedar Ridge," Mrs. Foster said, her voice dripping with venom. "We can't simply accept any woman who arrives under questionable circumstances." Sam's control snapped. He got down from the wagon, his fury a cold, quiet thing. "A woman travels 3,000 miles to marry my brother, arrives to find him dead, and you call her circumstances questionable? You stand here preaching charity while turning away a decent woman who's asked for nothing but honest work. You should be ashamed." "You're upset," one of the younger women said, laying a hand on his arm. "Come to dinner. We can find a solution." "Your solution would be sending Miss Sullivan away, wouldn't it?" Sam said. "Can't have competition." He looked at all of them, the women who had been circling like buzzards since Thomas died. "Thinking I need a wife." "Samuel?" The Reverend looked scandalized. "You're right," Sam said, climbing back into the wagon. "This is neither the time nor the place." They rode out of town, the explosion of whispers following them. "You shouldn't have done that," Margaret said. "They're your neighbors." "I've been living here my whole life. Never did me much good being polite. What will you do now? He asked as the ranch came into view. I don't know, she admitted. Go back to Philadelphia, I suppose. Unless, she said, her voice trembling but firm, unless you'd consider letting me stay on as your housekeeper. A proper business arrangement. He was quiet for a long time. The house has never looked better, he said finally. The food's been good. Chester seems happy. He looked at her. There'd be talk. There's already talk, she countered. You'd need your own space. The old foreman's cabin. Needs work, but it's solid. Hope, fierce and bright, bloomed in her chest. You're serious? I'm always serious, he said. But there was something almost soft in his eyes. We'd need to set terms. You'd be an employee, nothing more. Of course, she said, trying not to feel the sting. He held out his hand. We have an agreement. She shook it, and the deal was made. But as he showed her the dusty, cobweb-filled cabin, Sam Morrison found himself actually smiling. And he thought, maybe Thomas had been right after all. Maybe Margaret Sullivan was exactly what this ranch needed, what he needed. But he was wrong. She wasn't what the ranch needed. She was what the ranch's darkest secret was terrified of. Because Margaret Sullivan wasn't just a housekeeper, she was a witness. And she was about to uncover a truth that had already killed one Morrison brother and was coming for the other. The storm that hit 3 weeks later wasn't just a blizzard, it was a siege. Margaret had made the foreman's cabin her own, a cozy little haven against the world. But when the sky turned a sickening gray-green, she knew this was no ordinary storm. Blizzard's coming, Sam said, his face grim. A big one. They worked for hours, a frantic, desperate team, securing the stock, chopping wood, hauling water. The wind rose to a howl and the snow began to fall, thick and fast. Your cabin won't hold in this, Sam yelled over the gale. You'll have to stay in the main house. They made it inside just as the full force of the blizzard hit. The house shook, the wind screaming like a banshee. That first night they were trapped in a strange, forced intimacy. They ate stew by lamplight, the storm a wild beast outside their door. And then a crash, the sound of shattering glass. Margaret ran downstairs to find Sam in the main room, snow swirling through a broken window. A huge branch from the old cottonwood tree had punched right through. They fought the branch back out, Sam hammering a board over the hole while the wind tried to tear it from his hands. When it was done, they stood panting, snow dusting Sam's hair. A cut on his hand was bleeding freely. You're hurt. It's nothing. It's not nothing, she said, leading him to the kitchen. She cleaned the wound, her face intent in the lamplight. Margaret, he said, his voice odd. Your hair. She reached up, her braid undone, snow melting in the tangled strands. I must look a fright. No, he said, his voice rough. No, you don't. They stared at each other, the air suddenly charged with something that had nothing to do with the storm. He was leaning closer, and she wasn't moving away, and then a log crashed in the stove, breaking the spell. They jumped apart like guilty children. The storm raged for 2 more days. They played cards by the fire. Sam even brought out an old fiddle, filling the quiet house with mountain songs. Then he played a waltz. My mother loved that one, he said. He stood and offered his hand. Miss Sullivan, may I have this dance? In a world outside of normal rules, she accepted. He hummed the melody as they danced, his hand warm on her waist. I misjudged you, he said quietly as they turned. When you first came, I thought you were a burden. I was wrong, he said, his voice full of a feeling she couldn't name. You're stronger than you look, braver. They stopped dancing but didn't let go. He was leaning in again, and this time nothing was going to stop him. But he did. He stopped himself. The moment was gone. The morning after the storm, the world was silent and white. Sam was outside, already digging out the livestock. He came in for breakfast, his face grim. Your cabin? The roof held, but there's damage. It'll need work before you can move back. Margaret's heart sank and soared all at once. It doesn't make sense, he said, not looking at her. You trudging back and forth? Waste of wood heating 2 places. The house has plenty of room. People will talk, she whispered. Let them, he said, his eyes finally meeting hers. I'm tired of living by their rules. Tired of being alone in this house with nothing but ghosts. If you're willing to stay on as housekeeper, I'd be grateful for the company." It wasn't a proposal. It was a business arrangement. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the truth he couldn't speak. He wasn't just grateful for her help. He was grateful for her. "Then I'll stay," she said. But the storm had brought something else besides snow. When Sam went out to check the fences, he found tracks. Not from a deer or a coyote, a man's tracks. And they didn't lead away from the ranch. They led in a circle around it. Someone had been out there during the blizzard, watching them. And that night, as Margaret was banking the fire, she saw it. A flicker of movement out by the barn. A man's silhouette standing in the moonlight. He was just watching the house. Before she could call for Sam, he was gone. The branch through the window hadn't been an accident. The storm hadn't been the only thing trying to break into their home. They weren't just isolated. They were being hunted. And Sam's next words sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the winter cold. "It wasn't a branch that broke that window," he said, his face pale. "It was a rock, wrapped in cloth. I found it in the snow." He held out a muddy piece of burlap. It had a message scrawled on it in what looked like charcoal. "The girl is next." The town's gossip was a smokescreen. The polite shunning, the whispers. They weren't about propriety. They were about something else. Something far more sinister. And it all went back to Devil's Canyon. It all went back to how Thomas Morrison really died. Sam finally told her the truth. Thomas hadn't been thrown by his horse. That was the story Sam had been forced to tell. The story he told to protect himself. "I found him," Sam said, his voice a raw whisper. "He wasn't just dead, Margaret. He'd been beaten. His horse was still there, grazing peacefully. There were tracks, 3 men. They came, and they went." "But why? Who were they?" "Thomas had found something," Sam said, his eyes dark with a pain that was more than grief. "He wrote about it in his journal, a secret about this land, about this whole valley." He went to a loose floorboard beneath the hearth and pulled out a small leather-bound book, Thomas's journal. "He found gold," Sam said, his voice barely audible. "Not just a little placer gold in the creek. A vein, a big one, right here on our land." The story began to unravel, a dark and twisted thing. Thomas, the dreamer, had wanted to use the wealth to build a real town, a school, a church. But he'd made a mistake. He'd gone to the town's most prominent citizen for advice, the banker, Mrs. Foster's husband. And Mr. Foster, along with a few other respectable men in town, had a different plan for that gold. "They tried to buy him out," Sam explained, "offered him pennies on the dollar. When he refused, they threatened him. Thomas was a dreamer, not a fighter. He was scared. He wrote to you, told you to come, thinking a wife, a family, would give him the strength to stand up to them. But they didn't give him the chance," Margaret whispered, horrified. "No," Sam said grimly. "They killed him to get the map, the one he'd made of the gold vein. But they didn't find it. I got there first. I found him, and I found the journal. I hid it. I told everyone it was an accident, because I knew if they thought I had the map, I'd be next." So that's what this was all about. A fortune in gold, hidden somewhere on the ranch. The town's polite society weren't just gossips. They were vultures, circling, waiting. They wanted her gone because she was a complication, an outsider who might ask the wrong questions. "So the men in the storm," "Foster's men," Sam confirmed, "trying to scare us, trying to find the journal. The note wasn't about you. It was a message for me. The girl is next didn't mean you. It meant their next victim would be a woman if I didn't cooperate." But Margaret's mind was racing. A map. In the journal. She took the book, her hands shaking, and flipped through the pages of Thomas's neat script. There were sketches of barns, lists of crops, but no map. "It's not here," she said, confused. Sam frowned. "What? It has to be. I saw him draw it." He took the journal, his own hands frantically searching the pages. "It's gone." They stared at each other, a new terrible understanding dawning. "The day I arrived," Margaret breathed. You brought my trunk to the sewing room. You left me alone there for almost an hour while you did chores. And the journal was in there, Sam finished, his face pale. In the desk. She hadn't just unpacked her things that first day. Overwhelmed by grief and confusion, wanting a connection to the man she was supposed to marry, she had opened his desk. She had found the journal. And thinking it was just a diary, she had taken one page as a keepsake. A page with a detailed drawing of a tree, a creek, and a series of strange numbers. She had thought it was just a sketch of the ranch. She had torn out the map, and it was in her trunk right now. The one thing a half-dozen men were willing to kill for. The town's most powerful men thought Sam had the map, but he didn't. The despised bride did, and she had no idea she was sleeping with it under her bed. The realization sent a jolt of pure terror through Margaret. For weeks, she had been the unknowing guardian of the very secret that had gotten Thomas killed. She flew to her room, Sam right behind her. She knelt and threw open her trunk. There, tucked inside her copy of sonnets from the Portuguese was the folded page. It wasn't just a sketch. It was a map, complete with coordinates and geological notes. The key to a fortune. They've been watching us, Sam said, his voice grim. Waiting. They must have figured out the journal didn't have the map. They must be trying to figure out where it is. And now they're done waiting, Margaret said, her voice trembling. That message. The girl is next. Maybe it was for me. A warning that they know I'm involved now. Suddenly, Sam's public proposal, his defiant stand in front of the church, took on a whole new meaning. It wasn't just a desperate act of a man falling in love. It was a strategic move. You married me to protect me, she realized, looking at him with new eyes. As your housekeeper, I was vulnerable, a stray that could be easily removed. But as your wife, as Mrs. Morrison, I have a legal standing. It makes it harder for them to get to me without it looking like what it is. Murder. He didn't deny it. I told you, he said, his voice rough. I've forgotten what it felt like to have someone worth protecting. But protection wasn't enough. They were still trapped. Two people against a town run by powerful, ruthless men. What do we do? She asked. We can't go to the law. The law is one of them. We can't stay here, Sam said. They'll come for us. They'll tear this place apart. He paced the room, his mind working, the stone-faced rancher gone, replaced by a strategist. There's only one thing we can do. We have to beat them at their own game. How? They want the gold, he said, a dangerous light in his eyes. We'll give it to them, or rather, we'll make them think we will. He stopped pacing and looked at her. Thomas had a plan, a fail-safe. He told me about it once, if things ever got too dangerous. A place to meet a man he trusted, a U.S. Marshal, operating out of Denver. But Denver is a week's ride away. Exactly, Sam said. We can't both go. One of us has to stay here, make it look like everything is normal. The other one has to take the map and ride for help. He took a deep breath. You have to be the one to go, Margaret. Me? Sam, I can't. I've barely ridden a horse since the blizzard. And that's why they'll never suspect it, he countered. They're watching me. They're expecting me to make a move. They won't be watching you. You can slip away at night. Take the south trail through the canyons. It's rough, but it will hide your tracks. It was an insane plan. A woman alone riding through 100 miles of treacherous country, carrying a map that men would kill for. But as she looked at Sam's face, at the grim determination there, she knew he was right. It was their only chance. What about you? She asked, her heart aching at the thought of leaving him here, alone and exposed. I'll be fine, he said, but they both knew it was a lie. I'll lead them on a wild goose chase. Make them think I'm heading north. It'll buy you time. He took her hands in his. You said it yourself, Margaret. You're stronger than you look. Braver. You can do this. They spent the rest of the day in a flurry of quiet preparation. Margaret stitched the map into the lining of her coat. Sam packed saddlebags with food, water, and ammunition. He gave her his own pistol, a heavy Colt that felt alien in her hand. Just point and pull, he said, showing her how to use it. Don't hesitate. As night fell, a heavy, sorrowful silence settled over the house. This could be their last night together. The unspoken love that had grown between them was now a tangible, painful thing. He walked her to the barn where he had saddled Buttercup, the gentle mare. The moon was a pale sliver, offering little light. "You ride until dawn," he instructed, his voice low and urgent. "Find a place to hide during the day. Travel only at night. When you get to Denver, ask for Marshal Evans at the Federal Building. Trust no one else." She nodded, her throat too tight for words. He helped her mount, his hands lingering on her waist. "Margaret," he said, his voice cracking, "be careful." "You too," she whispered. She wanted to say more. She wanted to tell him she loved him, but the words were stuck behind a wall of fear. What if she never saw him again? He stepped back from the horse. "Go," he said. She turned Buttercup toward the south trail and didn't look back. She couldn't bear to. She rode into the darkness, the fate of the Morrison ranch, the truth about Thomas's death, and the life of the man she loved all resting on her shoulders. She had arrived as the despised bride. Now she was riding out as their only hope. The first night was a nightmare. Every shadow was a threat, every snap of a twig a gunshot. The canyon trail was treacherous in the dark, and more than once Buttercup stumbled, sending Margaret's heart into her throat. But she pushed on, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate burning fear for Sam. She rode until the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, then found a hidden alcove in the rocks to wait out the day. She ate a piece of dry jerky, gave Buttercup some water, and fell into a restless, dream-filled sleep. The second night was the same, a slow, agonizing journey through a landscape that felt alien and hostile. By the third day, she was exhausted, her body aching from the unfamiliar strain of riding. She was just starting to believe she might actually make it, and that's when she saw the smoke, a thin column rising from a valley a few miles ahead. It could be anything, a trapper's fire, a prospector's camp. But a cold dread told her it was something else. She tethered Buttercup and crept forward on foot, using the rocks for cover. As she peered over the final ridge, her blood turned to ice. It was a camp. 3 men sat around a fire, and tied to a tree, his face bruised and swollen, was Sam. It had been a trap. His wild goose chase to the north had been a feint to make her feel safe, to make her lower her guard. They had known about the South Trail all along. They had let her get a 2-day head start, then simply ridden ahead and waited for her to walk right into their hands. She saw Mr. Foster, the banker, step out of a tent. He was holding Thomas's journal. "He's a stubborn one," Foster said to one of the other men. "Still won't tell us where he sent her with the map." "He'll talk," the man grunted, kicking Sam in the ribs. Sam didn't make a sound. Margaret felt a white-hot rage that burned away all her fear. They were going to kill him, and it was her fault. She had the map. She had led them right to him. She backed away from the ridge, her mind racing. She couldn't ride for help. It was too far, too late. There was only one thing to do. The thing Sam had told her to do. Don't hesitate. She crept back to her horse, her movements now quiet and sure. She checked the pistol, the cold steel a comforting weight in her hand. She was no fighter. She was a woman who liked books and baking and roses. But she was also a woman who had faced down a blizzard in a town full of hate. She was a woman in love, and that made her dangerous. She tied Buttercup securely, far from the camp. Then she began to circle around, coming at the camp from the opposite direction, the direction they wouldn't expect. The sun was setting, casting long, confusing shadows. It took her an hour to get into position, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was hidden behind a jumble of rocks just 30 yards from the camp. They were getting careless, confident in their victory. Foster was drinking whiskey from a flask. The other 2 were arguing over a hand of cards. This was it. She rested the barrel of the pistol on a rock to steady her shaking hands. She remembered Sam's words, just point and pull. She took a deep breath, aimed for the center of the man who had kicked Sam, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was deafening in the quiet evening. The man by the fire gave a cry of surprise and crumpled, clutching his leg. The other card player dove for his rifle, but he was too slow. Margaret fired again. The second shot went wide, but it was enough. It bought Sam the 1 second he needed. With a roar of pure fury, Sam snapped the ropes that bound him. they must have been frayed, and launched himself at the remaining gunmen. The fight was brutal and short. Sam, despite his injuries, moved with a desperate strength. The two men crashed into the fire, sending sparks and embers flying. Mr. Foster, the banker, just stood there, frozen in terror, his whiskey flask dropping from his hand. Margaret didn't wait. She ran into the camp, the pistol still in her hand. Sam had his man on the ground, disarmed. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fierce pride. "I told you to ride," he gasped. "You taught me to fight," she shot back. She turned the gun on Foster. The banker held up his hands, his face a mask of pathetic fear. "Don't shoot, please. It was all Henderson's idea." "Henderson, the station master?" "He's the one who found out about the gold," Foster babbled. "He runs everything. I was just a partner. He killed Thomas. I saw it." The confession tumbled out, a torrent of cowardice and greed. Henderson, the friendly station master, was the ringleader. He'd used Foster's financial influence and hired outside muscle to do his dirty work. He was the one who had beaten Thomas to death in Devil's Canyon. Suddenly, a fourth man stumbled into the firelight. The one Margaret had shot in the leg. He was holding a pistol, and it was aimed straight at Sam's back. There was no time to shout, no time to think. Margaret threw herself at Sam, shoving him out of the way. A gunshot exploded, echoing through the canyon. Pain, white-hot and blinding, erupted in her shoulder. She cried out and fell, the world going dark at the edges. The last thing she saw was Sam's face, his expression a mask of pure horror as he screamed her name. The world came back in waves, the smell of smoke, the low murmur of voices, the feeling of being carried. Margaret's eyes fluttered open. She was in Sam's arms on the back of a horse. Her shoulder was a universe of pain, tightly bandaged. "You're awake." Sam's voice was a rough whisper near her ear. What happened?" "You saved my life," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. "The men are tied up. Foster is singing like a canary. We have everything we need to bring Henderson down." "My shoulder?" "The bullet went clean through," he said. "You're lucky, and you're the toughest person I've ever met." They rode through the night, a strange and silent procession. Sam, with his wounded wife in his arms, and Foster, their prisoner, tied to another horse. They weren't going to Denver. They were going back to Cedar Ridge. They were going to end this where it started. They arrived at dawn. The town was just waking up. Sam rode straight to the sheriff's office, kicked the door in, and threw a terrified Mr. Foster into a cell. He left Margaret in the care of the town's doctor, a kind old man who clucked his tongue at her wound, but praised her courage. Then Sam, with Thomas's journal in one hand and the map in the other, walked to the train station. Jake Henderson was in his office, counting the morning's receipts. He looked up, and his face went pale. "It's over, Jake," Sam said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a death sentence. The station master lunged for a pistol in his desk drawer, but Sam was faster. The fight was over before it began. When the U.S. Marshals arrived from Denver 2 days later, summoned by a telegram Sam had sent, the case was all but closed. Henderson and Foster, trying to save their own skins, implicated everyone else. The respectable men of the town who had backed the scheme, the hired guns, even Mrs. Foster, who had helped spread the rumors to isolate Margaret. The whole rotten foundation of Cedar Ridge society came crashing down. Margaret recovered slowly. Sam never left her side. The whole town, now shamefaced and humbled, came to offer their support. Mrs. Henderson from the Mercantile brought broth. Even Catherine Winters appeared with a basket of fresh bread and a sincere apology. "We were wrong about you," she said, her eyes meeting Margaret's. "About both of you." 6 months later, Margaret stood on the porch of the Morrison Ranch. Her arm was in a sling, but she was healing. The foreman's cabin had been repaired and turned into a schoolhouse, where Margaret now taught the local children how to read and write. Sam came and stood behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. Their son, born that spring, slept peacefully in a cradle just inside the door. They had named him Thomas. "The despised bride," Sam murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "The beloved wife," she corrected him, leaning back against his chest. "The woman who saved my life," he said. "The man who taught me how to fight for it," she replied. They stood together, watching the sunset paint the mountains crimson and gold. They had faced down death, betrayal, and a town full of vipers. They had taken a marriage of convenience and forged it into a love as strong and enduring as the land itself. Their story became a legend in those parts, a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't gold hidden in the hills, but the courage you find in your own heart and the love you find in the most unexpected places. It's a story about how a woman who was despised by everyone became the one person who could save them all. If you believe that courage and love can conquer even the darkest of evils, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next story from the wild heart of the frontier. And let me know in the comments below. At what point did you realize Margaret was the hero of this story? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for listening.